Hi, everybody. Thanks for joining me here for this lesson. In this lesson, we're going to talk about the 5 stages of conflict. The first stage that we're going to discuss here is the potential for conflict. So before we can have any conflict, something has to set the stage so that we're in a situation where conflict is likely or at least possible to occur. Now, there are a few different things that can contribute towards the potential for conflict, and the first one that we'll address is communication. Okay, so sometimes we have conflict not because of anything other than misunderstandings between people. And I'll give you an example. Years ago, I was coaching an NCAA sports team, and after a really bad competition, one of my athletes made a comment. It's okay, everybody. We'll be fine. We'll do better next time. We'll try harder, and we'll come back stronger. And he meant that as a very positive statement. But another athlete interpreted that as if we're going to try, if he's saying we're going to try harder, he's saying we didn't try hard this time. And that athlete felt like he was trying very hard, and that another person saying he wasn't trying very hard was an attack on him. So that was an example of a miscommunication or an error in communication that created the potential for conflict. Something else that can create the potential for conflict is structure. So imagine we're working at an organization and we have multiple people who need the same resources. So maybe we're running a warehouse and we have people who are paid on piece rates, okay? And the only thing they care about is making sure that they get more picks than anybody else, because the more picks they get, the more they're going to get paid. And some pallet jacks that they use for their picks have better batteries than other pallet jacks. There are different paths that people have to take through the warehouse. But essentially, we have a competitive structure here where different people working in the warehouse need to try to get better resources than other people, and our structures put them in a situation where they're not likely to be helping each other, because we've got kind of a zero-sum game here, and one person getting something good for themselves means that good thing is not available for another person. And that's an example of structure setting the stage for conflict. Another component that can lead to the potential for conflict are just personal issues. Sometimes we have personalities that don't get along. Sometimes people don't like each other for different reasons. Sometimes political beliefs can get in the way. So around election time, we sometimes see people arguing in the workplace, or setting the stage for conflict as they discuss different political candidates. But essentially, this third component is just different personal variables that really can't be accounted for by workplace situations. Once a potential for conflict has been created, stage 2 is the situation where we have cognition. And what this means is we either perceive the conflict or we start to feel the conflict. And the example that I'll give you here is we have a worker who notices that they have a coworker who wants all of the early shifts that are available. But if that person gets all of the early shifts, this person has to work late every night. So they start to see that, hey, there is a little bit of a competition here, and I'm not going to be able to get what I want if this person continues to push for what they want. And that's the point where the conflict is perceived or felt, and that's what we call cognition. Okay, of the third stage of the conflict process is where we start to look at intentions of the people involved. Okay, and the people involved can either decide that they want to be assertive in dealing with the conflict, or they can be unassertive in dealing with it. And they can also decide that they want to be cooperative, or they can be uncooperative. And as we look at this little matrix here, there's different areas where this fills out. And we'll start with assertive and cooperative. That leads us to collaborative situations. So when we're assertive and cooperative, we're being outgoing and working hard to try to find a solution that meets the needs of all people involved. Okay? But we can also be assertive and uncooperative. And when we're assertive and uncooperative, then we get to a point that we are actively competing for our own benefit. So we're looking to make sure that we benefit ourselves and end up potentially doing harm to the person that we're in conflict with. Okay, we could also be unassertive and cooperative. And in this situation, we're accommodating. And what happens here is, we're not outgoing in finding a way to meet the needs of the other person, but when we're faced with having to make a decision, we will maybe put our own needs on the back burner a little bit. Okay, and then we can also be unassertive and uncooperative. And this is a situation where we kind of just have avoiding intentions, and we decide we're going to try not to deal with that coworker. We're going to maybe try to arrive 5 minutes earlier or 5 minutes later so that we don't have to see them at the time clock. But we're going to do everything that we can to just make sure that we don't have conflict because we don't see the person and we kind of withdraw from the situation. Then we can also be in the middle of the matrix and have a situation where we're compromising, where we're not fully avoiding the conflict, but not necessarily being very assertive in resolving it. And we're somewhat cooperative, but not fully cooperative in this situation. All right, stage 4 is behavior. And this is where we really start to kind of see the conflict emerge, okay? And this is often stage 4 is when we actually notice that there really is conflict. And we might see things such as arguments in the workplace. We might see some competition for resources, like I talked about with the pallet jacks and the different time clock situations earlier. And we might also see people avoiding the same work areas, but this is where this behavior is where we start to see the conflict emerge. Okay, and then stage 5 is where we start to kind of realize the outcomes of the conflict. Okay, and there are two different types of general outcomes that we'll realize. One is a functional outcome, and this tends to improve for functional outcomes tend to improve our performance. Okay, so an example of a functional outcome might be we debate over a process, and because we debated over the process, we came up with a better solution than either one of us had come up with initially, and that led to a better outcome for the organization. So for an example on this, when I'm on a writing team, sometimes different members of the team have different ideas how we want to go with the research paper that we're working on. And we might have some conflict, and occasionally it can get kind of intense, but often by the end of a debate we'll come up with a much better direction that we want to go with the paper than we had started with in the very beginning. Okay, dysfunctional outcomes, however, they damage the organization, and these can be things like name calling and different types of aggressive behavior. So if we get into a conflict and we start calling people things like stupid or lazy and things like that, that would be an example of dysfunctional outcome that could occur. So as we summarize the stages of conflict here, and we look at this, we start out with the potential for conflict existing. Then as that potential exists, we start to recognize it through cognition. All right, then individuals develop their intentions. Ultimately, we see the behavior emerge, and this is where we tend to actually recognize that conflict exists. And then finally, the organization experiences the outcomes of the conflict. Okay, so I hope you enjoyed this video. I hope you learned something, and we'll talk to you soon.